The alarms began screaming long before anyone understood what had gone wrong. Deep inside a heavily armored prison ship drifting through hostile space, elite soldiers were running for their lives. Smoke filled the corridors. Emergency lights flashed crimson against twisted steel. Entire security teams had vanished without a trace. And at the center of it all was a single human. Not a general. Not a war hero. Not even a soldier. Just a husband. Across the vessel, terrified voices echoed through emergency channels. How is he doing this? No one had an answer. Hours earlier, the kidnapping had looked like the perfect operation. The target appeared harmless, a quiet human known throughout diplomatic circles for his patience, kindness, and unwavering devotion to his alien wife. Now an entire prison ship was falling apart around him. But the real disaster wasn't happening here. It was happening hundreds of light years away. Because at that exact moment, his wife received the transmission confirming his capture. She read it once, then slowly closed her eyes. Not in fear, in certainty. And somewhere across human space, ancient military protocols began waking up. The galaxy had made a dangerous assumption about humanity. For nearly 2 centuries, humans had been known as builders, traders, and diplomats. They negotiated border disputes, delivered aid to struggling colonies, opened their worlds to species that had once been enemies. To most civilizations, humanity looked civilized, predictable, safe. And that illusion became the greatest intelligence failure in galactic history. The kidnapped human was named Daniel Hayes. No military rank. No political influence. No classified access. Official reports described him as little more than the devoted husband of Ambassador Lyra Vesh, one of the most respected diplomats in known space. Their marriage had become a symbol of unity between species. The enemy saw something different. They saw leverage. A growing empire on the edge of explored space believed Daniel could be used to force concessions from multiple governments. Their analysts reviewed thousands of records and reached the same conclusion. Human emotional attachment was a weakness. So they took him. What happened next made no sense. Lyra's emergency appeals reached Senate chambers, defense councils, and planetary leaders across the galaxy. Meetings were called. Debates erupted. Statements were issued. Yet Earth remained silent. No threats. No ultimatums. No demands. Just silence. That silence unsettled people far more than anger would have. Then reports began arriving from human space. Reserve fleets were leaving orbit. Retired warships were being reactivated. Supply depots were opening under sealed authority codes. Nobody knew who had issued the orders. Nobody knew why every human government suddenly appeared united. Then a classified transmission reached every military command in human territory. Only 3 words appeared on the screen. Family. Under. Threat. The galaxy expected retaliation. What it got was something far more terrifying. Unity. Within hours of the alert, arguments that had divided humanity for generations simply vanished. Political rivals stopped fighting. Corporate fleets changed course. Colonial governments opened military stockpiles without hesitation. To outsiders, it looked impossible. To humans, it was instinct. Because there was one rule older than any nation, older than any alliance, older even than humanity's first steps into space. You do not abandon your own. The kidnappers had spent years studying human technology, human economics, human military doctrine. But they had completely overlooked the force that powered all of it. Loyalty. Not to governments. Not to corporations. To people. That was the mistake. Daniel Hayes wasn't important because of who he was. He was important because he mattered to someone. And for humanity, that was enough. Across the galaxy, observers watched events unfold with growing disbelief. Freighters became supply carriers overnight. Mining vessels were converted into logistics platforms. Entire civilian industries shifted production without being ordered. Nobody was forcing them. Nobody had to. Meanwhile, historians and military analysts began digging through ancient human records. What they found was unsettling. Stories of rescue missions launched for a single survivor. Wars prolonged because soldiers refused to leave wounded comrades behind. Expeditions crossing oceans, deserts, and frozen continents to bring one person home. Again and again, the pattern appeared. Humans accepted impossible odds when family was involved. Then came the reports that truly frightened the galaxy. Hidden shipyards were activating. Reserve fleets once believed obsolete were departing secure anchorages. Veteran commanders were returning to service. Not because they were ordered. Because they volunteered. And still, Earth said nothing publicly. No speeches. No threats. No declarations of war. Only movement. Endless movement. Then the first deep space sensor arrays detected something emerging from hyperspace. At first, analysts assumed it was an error. The numbers were too large, too organized, too fast. Additional scans confirmed the impossible. Thousands of human vessels were converging from every direction. Warships, carriers, logistics convoys, medical fleets. Everything required to sustain a conflict on a scale not seen in centuries. The realization spread through galactic leadership like wildfire. This was never a rescue operation. Not anymore. The kidnapping of one human husband had awakened the full attention of a Deathworld species. And for the first time, the empire responsible began to understand the danger. They had not taken a hostage. They had issued a challenge. A challenge humanity was already crossing the stars to answer. And the fleets had only just begun to arrive. The empire thought it still had control. It was wrong. When the first human fleets emerged at the edge of imperial territory, there were no grand speeches. No dramatic declarations broadcast across the stars. Only a single transmission. Return Daniel Hayes. That was it. One sentence. One opportunity. The Imperial Council gathered in confidence beneath the armored spires of their capital world. Their admirals reviewed defensive projections and smiled. Their fleets outnumbered any force in the region. Their planetary shields had never fallen. To them, humanity's demand sounded desperate. To humanity, it was mercy. The Council rejected it. Hours later, every sensor station in the sector detected movement. Human ships advanced. Not recklessly. Not emotionally. Methodically. Entire battle groups shifted into positions that cut off trade routes, military corridors, and hyperspace exits. Strategic targets were isolated before the first shot was fired. Then the war began. The Empire expected rage. Instead, they encountered discipline. Human commanders bypassed worlds that offered no resistance. Civilian populations were left untouched. Human fleets struck only military infrastructure, dismantling decades of imperial expansion in a matter of days. Each victory carried the same message. Return him. The answer remained no. Confident in their defenses, imperial leaders decided to prove humanity could be broken. A public execution was scheduled. Across thousands of systems, billions watched the live transmission. Daniel appeared restrained beneath bright lights. His clothing was torn. His face showed signs of captivity. Yet somehow he looked calmer than the officials standing around him. The lead governor stepped forward and announced humanity's failure. He declared the empire unchallenged. He promised the hostage's death would mark the end of human resistance. Then Daniel spoke. For the first time since his capture, the galaxy heard his voice. He didn't beg. He didn't bargain. His eyes lifted toward the recording drones. If Lyra can hear this, he said quietly, I love you. Silence filled the chamber. And if humanity can hear this, protect her. That's all that matters. The transmission ended. For several seconds, nothing happened. No response. No reaction. Just silence. The Empire celebrated. They thought the war was over. They had misunderstood that silence before. Now they were about to learn its meaning. Across human space, the recording spread faster than any military order. Citizens watched. Soldiers watched. Fleet commanders watched. Parents watched. Children watched. One ordinary man had asked for only one thing. Protect her. And humanity answered. What followed would later be studied for centuries. Reserve forces accelerated into combat zones ahead of schedule. Logistics networks doubled output. Entire fleets executed maneuvers previously considered impossible. The Empire's predictive systems collapsed under the pressure. Humanity wasn't behaving according to doctrine. It was behaving according to purpose. Every battle became part of a single objective. Bring him home. Imperial fortresses began falling. Defense lines shattered. Military governors vanished from conquered sectors. World after world slipped beyond Imperial control. And still, Daniel remained missing. Then came the twist no one expected. A human intelligence vessel intercepted encrypted Imperial communications during the evacuation of a strategic command station. The message changed everything. The execution had been fake. Daniel was alive. The broadcast had been staged to break human morale. Instead, it had fueled the fire. For a moment, command centers across human space went completely silent as analysts verified the discovery. Then confirmation arrived. Daniel Hayes was being held beneath the Imperial capital itself. The Empire's most protected world. Its most heavily defended fortress. Its final sanctuary. The revelation sent shockwaves through both sides of the conflict. Imperial leaders realized their greatest bargaining chip had become their greatest vulnerability. Human commanders saw something else. An opportunity. Within hours, fleets from dozens of sectors altered course toward the capital. Not for conquest. Not for revenge. For rescue. As the armada advanced, citizens across the galaxy watched in disbelief. Entire civilizations had fought wars over territory, over resources, over ideology. Humanity was crossing the stars for one man. The closer the fleets came, the more terrifying the truth became. Nothing was slowing them down. Not fleets. Not fortresses. Not fear. The Empire had started this conflict believing it understood human weakness. Now its capital stood surrounded by the strongest force the galaxy had ever witnessed. And somewhere beneath that world, Daniel Hayes was waiting. The rescue mission was about to begin. The end began in silence. No speeches echoed across the fleet channels. No celebrations followed the encirclement of the Imperial capital. Thousands of human warships hung above the world like a gathering storm, their engines glowing against the darkness of space. Every commander knew the objective. Daniel Hayes. Nothing else mattered. The Empire still possessed powerful defenses. Orbital weapons platforms guarded every approach. Planetary shields stretched across entire continents. Millions of soldiers waited beneath them. But something had changed. For the first time since the war began, fear had changed sides. Imperial leaders sat inside fortified bunkers watching sensor feeds with growing disbelief. Humanity had crossed half the galaxy. Not for territory. Not for resources. Not for power. For one husband. And now they were at the gates. The final operation began without warning. Stealth insertion teams slipped through shield gaps created by coordinated fleet strikes. Electronic warfare units blinded surveillance networks. Precision attacks disabled defense nodes without leveling cities. Humanity wasn't there to conquer. Humanity was there to retrieve. Deep beneath the capital, hidden below layers of military infrastructure, Daniel sat inside a reinforced detention complex. Weeks of captivity had changed him. He looked thinner, tired, but not broken. The guards had noticed something strange throughout his imprisonment. He never acted afraid. Even when the war reached their world. Even when explosions shook the facility. Even when rumors spread that the Empire itself was collapsing. Daniel carried the same quiet certainty. Because somewhere deep inside, he believed someone was coming. Then the lights went out. The facility plunged into darkness. Emergency systems activated. Alarms erupted. And for the first time, panic appeared among the guards. The rescue had arrived. Corridors became battlegrounds. Human special operations teams advanced with relentless precision, clearing defensive positions one section at a time. Every second mattered. Every delay increased the risk. Above them, entire fleets fought to maintain the opening. Below them, humanity raced against time. The closer they got to Daniel's location, the harder resistance became. Elite Imperial units formed defensive lines. Heavy weapons blocked key access points. Entire sections were sealed. Still the rescuers kept moving. Forward. Always forward. Because nobody was being left behind. Then came the breakthrough. A reinforced security door collapsed inward. Smoke rolled through the opening. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then a human voice echoed through the darkness. Daniel Hayes. The prisoner looked up. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. The war was over. At least for him. Yet outside the prison walls, history was still unfolding. News of the successful rescue spread through the fleet almost instantly. Command centers confirmed the impossible. The hostage was alive. Humanity had succeeded. Across countless ships, exhausted crews stared at their screens. Some cheered. Others simply sat in silence. The mission that had united an entire species was complete. But the moment everyone remembered came minutes later. Not on a battlefield. Not inside a command center. Inside a landing zone illuminated by emergency floodlights. A transport descended from the sky. The hatch opened. Ambassador Lyra Vesh stepped forward. For weeks she had carried the weight of uncertainty. For weeks she had watched worlds burn while wondering if she would ever see her husband again. Now she stood frozen. Because Daniel was standing in front of her. Alive. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The distance between them disappeared in seconds. The galaxy watched as they embraced. No dramatic music. No political statements. No military ceremony. Just two people who had refused to give up on each other. And somehow, that moment carried more weight than every battle that came before it. The war officially ended days later. Without their hostage, the Empire's leadership fractured almost immediately. Regional governors surrendered. Military commanders negotiated ceasefires. Allies abandoned old loyalties. The regime that had once threatened entire sectors collapsed under the consequences of its own decision. Historians would spend generations analyzing the conflict. Military academies studied the campaigns. Strategists examined fleet movements. Economists researched the industrial mobilization. But every serious investigation reached the same conclusion. The Empire had misunderstood humanity from the beginning. They assumed human strength came from technology. It didn't. They assumed human power came from fleets. It didn't. They assumed human resilience came from surviving a death world. That wasn't the answer either. The truth was much simpler. Humanity's greatest weapon was loyalty. The belief that every individual mattered. The refusal to abandon family. The certainty that no one gets left behind. That lesson spread far beyond the former empire. Across the galaxy, governments quietly rewrote emergency protocols. Military doctrines changed. Diplomatic agreements evolved. A new warning appeared inside strategic briefings. Never threaten a human's family. Never mistake kindness for weakness. And never assume a single human stands alone. Because behind every human is an entire species willing to answer the call. Years later, a monument was constructed overlooking the restored capital. Not to commemorate a battle. Not to celebrate a victory. But to remember a lesson. At its center stood two figures. A human. And his wife. Together. Visitors traveled from thousands of worlds to see it. Some came to study history. Others came to understand humanity. Most left with the same realization. The war had never truly been about Daniel Hayes. He was simply the spark. The real story was what happened when an entire species decided that one life was worth crossing the stars for. And in that decision, humanity revealed something the galaxy would never forget. The Empire believed it had captured one harmless husband. What it actually captured was the peace of a species born on a death world, forged by impossible odds, and united by bonds stronger than fear itself. That truth reshaped the stars. But beyond the borders of known space, another crisis was already beginning. On a distant frontier colony, an isolated alien governor had just made a decision that looked very familiar. A human child had disappeared.